the same units, either on a per head basis, a per acre basis. And this example using the garlic and the spinach, you're down to a square foot, dollars per square foot. Or you could do it, Diane mentioned that she keeps track of labor, so you could do it on a basis of gross profit per hour of labor. So that's what I did with this example. We broke it down. The gross profit is for garlic is $506.19, and we know how many hours that we needed to commit to generate that gross profit. So you divide the number of hours by into the $506. You get $37.50 per hour that you contribute back to covering overhead costs. Or you can do it on a per square foot basis. And so that you get, now you can compare garlic and spinach on equal footing, essentially, on a per hour basis, on a per square foot basis. But as Diane mentioned before, you don't want this, there is challenges. This is just one evaluation, one tool of evaluating an enterprise, whether or not you should go with that, and how much of that enterprise you should produce of that particular product. And like I say, this is just one evaluation of that. And as Diane mentioned, there's lots of number of other factors when you come into evaluating whether or not you're going to add more garlic to you plant more garlic this next year. One is time to harvest. What's your availability of that that market? Do you have is there more demand for the market? And she also mentioned having adequate storage. And it also comes back into rotating and disease cycles, and all those kind of things can factor into what you do out there. But like I say, the gross profit is just one way of looking at that, and it gives you the number side of it, the finance side of it, and there's a number of other factors you got to consider as you work ahead. One other thing that the gross profit analysis can be used for, and that is looking at a risk assessment, and where you would look at the same enterprise in a way of looking at what's, as far as you would keep all of your expenses the same except for one that you have maybe least control over. And this example with my business with using the goats for vegetation work, essentially days on project is kind of my factor that has the biggest impact on my operation, so I use that as a variable in my risk assessment, and looking at the different days on project and how big of impact what kind of impact that has on the gross profit. So you look at the poor side of it, the business, if I only had 45 days of the goats out on projects, I'd be looking at a return of a little over $7,000. Now if I can get it up to kind of average, and I can get up to 90 days, get out to about 3 months, and I get into kind of around close to $28,000. If I can get really good and get higher, almost a little over 4 months, looking at a $53,000 return. So when you're looking at the level of risk, whether or not, if you can't do it if I can't focus in and get at least 90 days of work out there, this would not be a very viable alternative enterprise. So it really gets you an idea of what level of risk is involved, and how. And since you would want to keep one item, all items constant and very one, you can look at this on the income side of it or on the expense side. And one of the biggest expenses, I didn't put up an example on this, but one of the big expenses of my operation is the hay. So if I looked at what the impact of, if hay prices went up significantly, what impact would that have on the gross profit analysis? So those are some ways if you can go through an enterprise and look at different scenarios and how that impacts your gross profit analysis, and gives you an idea of what the risk is for that particular enterprise. And also what you can do when you get that, you can do it for using that the risk analysis comparing two enterprises. Like that we have ways you do the vegetation work with the goats. You also do the meat goats. And we looking at two gross profit analysis. The meat goats, the gross profit analysis is looking at about $5,800, and the vegetation side of it's $28,000. But one of the things when you look at that, you look at the comparison of the total expenses. Total expenses for the meat goat side of it is like only $9,000. I only have to invest $9,000 in there to get that return of a gross profit of almost $5,800. Whereas on the vegetation side of it, you have to put in $25,000 into that to get that gross profit of $28,000. So there's a lot of more money invested into the vegetation side of the business, that enterprise. So if something goes wrong, you could end up with a big, if you don't get the number of days on a project, or you get unexpected expenses, but you can have that. There's more risk involved in that side of the business, the vegetation enterprise, because there's more dollars invested in that to get to that return. You get a better return, but there's more dollars invested in it. So you've got to look at, where's your level of risk tolerance, and do you have, built-in. The key to any of these, as we've talked about before in the holistic management, is that that feedback loop and monitoring, and making sure that things are moving ahead as you plan. But it just helps you, like I say, when you're comparing two enterprises, just to look at potential dollars that you have to invest and the potential return for that particular enterprise. It just helps you get some of those numbers out in front so you can look at and evaluate them. You can also use gross profit. One other thing you can use it for is to evaluate different use of the same asset. For example, in this example, you could using livestock grazing of a particular piece of property versus and producing the product that you market versus growing hay and marketing that. So you could compare those two enterprises and what return on asset is, a return per acre, dollar per acre. So the positive side, just kind of quick summary of the gross profit analysis. Some things that it works well for, and that is one of the things is comparison of that risk. You can a good comparison of when you're evaluating two different enterprises and looking at how much return there is for that particular enterprise towards covering your overhead costs, and you can evaluate using that same resources. You got the land base, you've got the whatever your fixed costs are. And what enterprises in your particular situation best utilize those resources that you have on your farm or ranch, and looking at that situation, what are your strategic advantages? And then you have you got a good understanding of what those assets are and what kind of return you're getting on that, and good understanding of those fixed expenses and how you can maybe ways to really manage those fixed expenses. Couple things to keep in mind is that dangers of gross profit analysis, that it does not ensure that you're profitable. All the gross profit analysis is doing is to showing you that how much that particular enterprise will contribute back to covering those overhead costs. It's not, there's no, land payments not in there, equipment payments are not in there. So in order to see that you're profitable, you have to complete the complete financial planning process in order to make sure that you are profitable. And again, it's only one of the 7 tests or filters. You have to, if you add in a new enterprise, you need to go through that complete process so you can look at it from the financial side, which is kind of what the gross profit analysis is doing. You got to look at it on the environmental side of things, and the social side of it. How does that fit in with your quality of life, and then how is it also, as Diane mentioned earlier, how does that fit in with the resources that you have available, and so all those things come into play. And when you're doing enterprises, you don't want to, cliche, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. That diversity equals stability. Having more than one enterprise helps reduce that risk as well, and not focusing on, like, for example, the garlic was a great moneymaker, but for example, if you have a challenge there and you get a disease and it wipes out your garlic, and that's your only income for the year, you're in trouble. So it's important to be diversified. So are there any questions? And there is the assignment for this next week. So it looks like at least I have one question.
Yes, there's a question. It's from Amanda, and it's about your goat business, actually, Craig. It says, Craig, do you have different goats for meat goats versus your vegetation control goats, and what kinds of goats do you have?
No, I don't have. They're both I use the goats for the vegetation work, and essentially the side of that is the other, I guess, use of them is that some of the males will go to the meat market. And what type of goats I have boar and Kiko crosses.
So that's the only question that we have so far.
And one other thing that one of the things you want to do as part, there's another tank, Dan sent me a note here asking a question, and it's about whether or not we complete a gross profit analysis every year to help you make decisions. And that is, that if you remember back to last week when we did the overview of holistic financial planning, and part of that process was the annual review, which one of that is completing the gross profits analysis for your existing enterprises to see if they were as profitable as you had planned them to be. So that is, yes, you do normally do a gross profit analysis at the end of the year as well, to give you an idea. Okay, this is what we planned. What do we end up with? Was it as good as or better than we had planned it was? So yes, it's a good tool to help you make decisions in the future as well.
Great, thank you, Craig. So now we're moving back to Diane, and she's going to talk a little bit about record keeping.
Well, we're moving right along here. Thanks, Craig. I always learn something new. I mean, I make every effort. I mean, I'm great for keeping records and tracking things, but then oftentimes I don't really know what to do with them after I have them all together. So I'm going to kind of give you a little, let's see if we can make this work. I'm going to give you an overview of some basic record keeping techniques, and then once I've gone through just some basics, because I found that one of the things that is a huge challenge for most of us that are farming is we get into farming and ranching because we absolutely love this, but then we are failing in a lot of different aspects. And I find that the more that I know, the more I know I need to learn. I'm not getting this to move forward. There we go. And it always comes up with never enough time. So thinking about what your record keeping system is, and the bottom line is one of the most important records that a farmer can keep is their finance and expenditure records. We need to be tracking our profits, our expenses, our sales. We need to do that just to be able to do our taxes every year, but you need to be able to effectively keep track of everything you do on the farm, and this includes everything from your seed inventory to seed purchases that are in for the plants and crops that are sown on the land. You need to be tracking the animals that are bought to live on the farm, your cows, your sheep, your chickens. You've got to track all of that to know if your time that is the most, to me, that's the most valuable thing I have. I mean, all of us have that. We never have enough time, and I've planted plenty of time in my garden, and I still never have enough time. So being able to keep track of all your purchasing, and just I'm going to go over some very simple record keeping techniques, and Barbara is going to take us into a next level of record keeping techniques, if I can get the slide to move forward. Come on, baby, you can move. That tray a friend of mine from Holland painted for me. I'm just not getting this thing to move.
I see that the cursor keeps going back to Craig. So Craig, perhaps you could advance it, and then I think if you touch your mouse or keyboard in any way, it steals it from Diane. So if you click Diane, you should have it again.
So we think I have it again?
You will once you click your mouse and then move it.